It has now been 8 years since the release of the first Fatal Fury game, and the franchise had over 7 main titles under its belt, multiple ports, and cross-media releases. SNK, on the other hand, has just released a new hardware unit, the Hyper NeoGeo 64. A new high-end arcade unit that was supposed to replace the now aging NeoGeo MVS and AES systems. SNK had also planned to release a consoleized version of the hardware as well, yet the system was not well received by fans and critics due to multiple reasons, which you can check in the history of the Hyper NeoGeo 64 documentary. The link is above and in the description. The new unit had few games under its belt, and none of them were able to achieve the desired reception nor win fans' hearts, despite heavy hitters like Samurai Showdown having 2 titles already on the platform. SNK, knowing the massive success and following of the Fatal Fury series, decided to make a new title for the Hyper NeoGeo 64, and one that was supposed to reboot the series for a new generation of fans. Titled Garou Densetsu Wild Ambition, or as we know it in the West, Fatal Fury Wild Ambition. To take on this important task, veteran producer Hiroshi Matsumoto was chosen as lead producer, along with Seigo Ito and Mitsuhari Inoue as co-producers, both of them having worked on the previous real-bout Fatal Fury games. Seeing the game for the first time running on a Hyper NeoGeo 64, it is easy to see how ambitious the design and graphics team were. The game is easily one of the best 3D games of SNK on the Hyper NeoGeo 64. Character movements was also fluid and fast compared to other games on the Hyper NeoGeo, like the 2 Samurai Showdown games. Released in January 1999, Wild Ambition used the 3D capabilities of the Hyper NeoGeo 64 to power the first 3D game of the series. The game itself is a remake of the first Fatal Fury game, making the events that happened during the first chapter, like Geese falling from his tower to his apparent death, non-canon. The story also changed some key elements, like adding brand new characters to the series or changing some events from the first tournament, like its name from the King of Fighters to the King of the Fighters. While Fatal Fury Wild Ambition is a 3D fighting game, the gameplay itself is very similar to that of 2D fighters. SNK decided to keep the same button layout from the real bout Fatal Fury 2 to not alienate fans. A for punches, B for kicks, and C for the special attack, which depending on the character could be either a kick or a punch. The D button, however, which was previously used for the line sway mechanic or lane change in the previous games, is now called the axis shift button. This feature allows players to move their characters to the background or foreground using 3D movement to avoid attacks or circle their enemies. Every character also has an assortment of special moves and desperation moves, now called superpower attacks. Superpower attacks can only be performed when the player's health meter is flashing red, and does not use the new heat meter. The heat meter, which replaces the power meter from the previous games, starts at 50% full at the beginning of every match, though it can change between rounds of the same match. Players fill the meter by attacking their opponents or taunting them, while taking damage or being thrown decreases the gauge. If a player takes damage but his opponent stops attacking him or her, the meter will slowly replenish to 50% again. When the player's heat meter is filled, the message Max OK will appear on the top of the gauge. Players may then perform an overdrive power or a heat blow. The heat meter will be almost fully depleted if either of these moves are used, but this can also happen if the player takes too much damage or performs numerous counterattacks. If this happens, a danger message will appear. If the player takes too much damage, leading to a fully empty heat meter, the character will go into an overheat state. This causes the player to get dizzy, becoming vulnerable to the opponent's attacks. Another new feature introduced in Fatal Fury Wild Ambition is the guard attack. Blocking an attack at the same exact moment as it hits will not result in any chip damage and results into the attacking opponent being pushed away. This could be similarly compared to a perfect parry from other modern games. A new technique introduced in Fatal Fury Wild Ambition, which we mentioned before, is the heat blow. This offensive move is an unblockable attack that may stun or launch the opponent into the air when it connects. The player can perform a heat blow when the heat meter is full and in the max OK state. Pressing the A, B, and C buttons simultaneously will activate the move. The player can use the heat blow as a counter mechanic by activating it while being attacked by the opponent to interrupt their offensive. Using the heat blow will decrease the heat meter close to the danger state. Fatal Fury Wild Ambition changes the potential power, P power attacks, and renames them to overdrive power. Overdrive power attacks work differently from the P power attacks of the old games. The player can perform overdrive power attacks once the heat meter is full, regardless of how much health the player has. Using an overdrive power decreases the heat meter close to the danger point as well. In terms of roster, Fatal Fury Wild Ambition took some liberties and changed many of the game's canon to allow for certain favorites to be in this first chapter. First and foremost, we have the legendary trio of Terry Bogard, Andy Bogard, and Joe Higashi. Mai Shiranui, due to her insane popularity, also makes her way to this retcon first episode, as well as Kim Kapwan. Both of these characters were not part of the story until the second game of the series. Returning from Fatal Fury 1 are Raiden, Billy Khan, and of course the game's final boss, Geese Howard. A surprise return from Fatal Fury 3 is Ryuji Yamazaki, who also now plays a role in the first chapter of the reboot. New to the series are two original fighters, Toji Sakata and Tsugumi Sendo. Toji is a legendary practitioner of the fighting style Dainanryu Aiki Jujutsu. He was once the best friend and the rival of Tatsumi Suo, Blue Mary's grandfather and the man who trained Geese Howard in Aiki Jujutsu. Believing that he was destined to challenge Tatsumi in a death match, this encounter never occurred since Tatsumi was eventually killed by his former student, Geese Howard. Toji enters the King of the Fighters tournament to defeat the man who killed his rival. Tsugumi Sendo is a high school girl from Osaka who was taught wrestling by her father, Kantetsu, since a very early age. However, she is recently ashamed of this, especially after she was told by a boy she had a crush on that women wrestlers are unfeminine and unattractive. After hearing this, she wanted to drop out of her wrestling training. After butting heads with her overbearing father, Kantetsu will allow her to drop out, but only under the condition that she brings a decisive victory in the King of the Fighters tournament. Despite her original hatred for wrestling, she has come to enjoy fighting as she begun to win matches. SNK also decided to include a secret character for this arcade version in the form of Li Shanfei, who made her return from her debut game Real Bout Fatal Fury 2. Story-wise, as previously mentioned, the game is a retelling of Fatal Fury 1, as SNK hoped to reboot the franchise for the new system with 3D mechanics. Geese Howard, the murderer of Terry and Andy's adoptive father Jeff, is hosting the newly announced The King of the Fighters tournament, just in time for Terry's return to Southtown after a 10-year absence. This led Terry, his brother Andy, and Joe Higashi to enter the competition in order to avenge Jeff and save Southtown from the grips of Geese Howard. At the end of the game, Geese is not killed nor thrown from the building, but just loses to Terry. Unfortunately, the game lacked any meaningful endings, which was a questionable decision from SNK. As previously mentioned, SNK changed the name of the first tournament from the King of Fighters to King of the Fighters, maybe to differentiate between the Fatal Fury lore and that of the main KOF series. 6 months after the game's initial release, SNK released a PlayStation port of Fatal Fury Wild Ambition on June 1999. This version included exclusive characters not available on the arcade version. First, Shanfei, who was a secret character in the arcade version, is now a selectable fighter. Geese Howard, the unplayable boss of the arcade version, is also playable from the beginning. In addition, Duck King and Mr. Karate were also added to this port. Mr. Karate is an older version of Ryo Sakazaki from the Art of Fighting series. The PlayStation version of Wild Ambition also included 2 cinematic CGI intros to explain the setting of the game. The first and longer one retells the events of the death of Jeff Bogard by a young Geese Howard, in front of Terry and Andy's eyes. It also chronicles Terry's return to Southtown after 10 years of absence. While by today's CGI standards, it might not look impressive, the Fatal Fury Wild Ambition PlayStation intro was an absolute stunning video in 1999. The second, and much shorter cinematic, shows Geese Howard training in his dojo in front of the watchful eyes of his bodyguards, Ripper and Hopper. SNK had big hopes for Fatal Fury Wild Ambition to push the poorly received Hyper NeoGeo 64 system into the spotlight and into the arcades. But due to multiple odd decisions from the company when it comes to the new hardware, Fatal Fury Wild Ambition, while seen as a decent fighting game, never reached its full potential. Game Machine listed the arcade version in their March 15, 1999 issue as being the 3rd most successful arcade game of the month. The PlayStation version of Fatal Fury Wild Ambition received mixed reviews. Japanese publication Famitsu gave the game a score of 25 out of 40. If you are interested in the history of the Hyper NeoGeo 64 and why it failed, check out my documentary about the hardware in the link above as well as in the description below. Seeing how the Hyper NeoGeo 64 was a failure for the company, SNK decided to keep releasing games for the aging Neo Geo arcade system, which it previously planned to retire. And due to the success of the Fatal Fury franchise, it was only natural for SNK to shift some of its resources to work on a brand new Fatal Fury game, one that would revolutionize the franchise and maybe even the genre. Fatal Fury Mark of the Wolves. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Big shout out to the channel's patrons who are helping the channel produce this content. Don't forget that you can become a patron and receive exclusive early access as well as some digital goodies. Details are in the description below.